When you revise your book, your final step is to go through and make sure every word is the best it can possibly be. But which words do you need to change and which ones should stay exactly the way they are? Welcome to part 3 of How to Revise Your Book. Part 1 and part 2, I talked about the plot and I talked about the characters. In part 3, I'm going to talk about the fine-tuning part. In part 1, I talked about how writing a book is a lot like making something like chili, where you lay the groundwork with the ground beef and the vegetables, and then you start layering in the spices. This part is where you're really doing that final taste test. Like, do I need to add a little sugar to offset the tartness from the tomatoes, or do I need to add a little more salt or a little bit more heat? It's where you're fine-tuning your recipe to make it as good as it possibly can be. Think about that as you're going through your book. What I want you to do is look at every single scene and think, did it really deliver the emotional impact that I was looking for? How are you going to know that? You've got a barometer already inside you. Your gut, if you listen to it, will tell you when the book is kind of falling flat or not really grabbing the reader. Your gut knows from years and years of reading that this is just not exactly up to par. So you need to trust it. And when your gut says, it could be better, then you need to go back and make it better. I want you to look at the words that you have used and see if you can show more by using more powerful adjectives and verbs and nouns. Can you really draw out that emotion? Can you take the tension on the page and slow it down a little bit so the reader is really, really waiting for something to happen by just adding a little bit here and stretching it out, or even changing the placement of the sentences so you've got some short sentences and longer ones. All of these things are tricks of the trade in order to keep the reader glued to their seat. One word or one sentence by itself can sometimes really drive home a point. And sometimes a really long paragraph can make the reader feel really anxious about how things are going to work out. So you want to look at the pacing of your book and decide, am I going to need to tighten this or expand it in order to get across the emotion that I want to? The second thing I want you to look for, and this is tip 8, I think, because I got 9 altogether, is whether you have created flawed characters who aren't perfect even at the end. Yes, your character has to grow and change by the end of the book. They've got to learn some lessons and become better human beings, basically. But they should not be perfect. Nobody likes a perfect person. That's why the Stepford Wives are kind of the punchline of a joke, because they're too perfect. You want your character to be flawed and human and have relatable conditions and worries and fears. So think about your character's past, which I talked about in the second video, and look at how that has made them flawed and how you can make them stronger, better humans, but also still a little bit flawed so that the reader really relates to them. One of the ways that you can do that and show the growth for the character is having them face the same challenge twice in the book. So if your character has, say, a house in their past that was really a traumatic place for them to be. When they first go to the house early in the book, they're still traumatized. But after they grow and change and become the humans that they were meant to be, they go back to the house and they feel empowerment and they're not affected by it as much. I've read a ton of books that are like that, where characters go back to a place that they were before or a state that they were in before, and they are stronger and better because of it. It is a great plot trick to really just show your reader that the character has grown and changed without telling them, because readers don't like to be told. They like to involve their imaginations. And finally, number 9, I want you to go through and tighten and tighten and tighten some more. Most of us, I know I do, most of us overwrite. And there's a lot of places where you can take out words that you don't need, or maybe you just went on a little bit too long in a scene. And how do you know where you need to tighten? You should act out your book. So if you have a bunch of characters in a scene, I want you to get up and move around the scene like the characters are. I want you to say the dialogue and then read the narrative that goes in between and time it and see if that seems unnaturally long. Because if you have 2 characters that are talking, for instance, and they're having an argument, and then one character sits there and thinks for 3 pages, well, in the real world, the other person would be like, why are you thinking for so long? That's kind of weird. You want to make sure that your actions match what you envisioned in your head and that they could physically work. Now, I'm not saying you got to jump on a speeding car, but just sort of see it and role play it for yourself so that you can make sure that everything is moving and working as it should. I want you to go through and look at the white space in your book. This is something I've talked about in other videos, but the white space is basically the space between the paragraphs. If you have paragraphs that last for pages and pages, then the reader feels like there's a lot to read there. Now, I am by no means saying don't write deep books, because I love deep books, but you've got to think about your audience and your genre. Is this a genre where people expect it to kind of move along quickly? Then you're going to have a lot of white space in there, because that will give the perception of it moving quickly. Is it a place where you're going to want the reader to have time to absorb some information, maybe a secret that's been discovered in the book? White space gives the reader the mental space to absorb and sort of process what they've just read. So you don't want to have it be too dense. You really want to break it up visually for the reader too. Maybe this is a good place for you to put in an action or some dialogue to move the pacing along a little bit. And then do one final gut check. If you're reading a scene and then you skip over it to get to the next one, your gut is telling you that maybe that scene is dragging a little bit, or maybe it's a little boring. Even you don't want to read it, then maybe it needs some work. So go back and fix it. You absolutely can. Whatever you put on the page, do it with intention to make sure that you are delivering the best possible experience for the reader, because you want them to want to come back to your next book and your next book and your next book. And if you've missed any of the other parts of revision, start right here with the first one and go through your book and make it amazing.